Hey, on today's episode of Todd's podcast, we have Major General Jake Polumbo. We're going to recap his presentation to the America Freedom 250 event this past Saturday night that Eli and I were fortunate enough to attend. There he talked about how America gained their independence. We talked about the military. We talked about how important civics are and giving back to the community with volunteerism. It was a wonderful show. I also want to talk about the semiquincentennial. That's usually what Eli says. And I want to wish America a happy 250. It's Independence Day is coming up, depending on what day you're listening to this. But it's a wonderful show with General Polumbo, as usual. A little more thoughtful, that I hope you'll enjoy the direction we went on this. So thank you, and thank you, Eli, for participating in the event the other night, and had a good show. Take a listen. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Todd's podcast. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, you are familiar with this week's guest, Major General retired Jake Polumbo with the United States Air Force. General Polumbo has a 34-year active duty career as a fighter pilot, having flown over 3,000 hours in all models of the F-16, and he was the first United States Air Force general officer to fly combat missions in the U-2S Dragon Lady. That's the spy plane that we utilize. He flew 21 of these combat missions in Operations Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. This past Saturday, Eli and a few of our friends had the honor of attending the Freedom 250 event held on the Sun and Fun campus at the Lakeland Airport. General Polumbo was the keynote speaker at the event and gave, in my opinion, one of the two best speeches that I've heard him give since he returned to Lakeland in 2015. Heard a lot of speeches around the dinner table with him, but this was a little more formal setting. He was in his dress outfit, and we were in a coat and tie, and Eli was looking spiffy as usual. Ladies, you really want to see him in a suit and tie. Part of the way through General Polumbo's remarks, I looked over at Eli, and I texted him, and I said, we need to see if General Polumbo could come on the show and reprise his remarks and, kind of give his message, because they were that important. Eli nodded in agreement. So, General, welcome back to Todd's podcast, and thank you for agreeing to come on and talk to us today.
Todd, thanks. Good to be back with you and Eli. I guess you guys don't mind having me in every once in a while, but it's great to be back with you both.
It's always good to have you here. I appreciate your insight in what's going on in the world. This episode is going to air right before July 4th, the Independence Day. So really your message really spoke to me a couple of nights ago, and as it did to Eli and the group of friends that were there listening to you. And I just wanted you to kind of tell us a little bit about it. You've got a little bit more time. You were kind of pinched on time a little bit Saturday, but we're not going to take a lot of time, but we are going to take enough time for you to kind of get your points across without being rushed. And one thing I did notice, no one was on their cell phone. No one was texting, other than me texting Eli. We got to get Jake on the podcast. But a lot of times you go to some events, and I spoke to a group of realtors last week, and I looked around, and 4 of the 8 people in the room were texting. I kind of chuckled, but no one was doing that Saturday night when you were talking. So I thought it's important if you could come back and give us your talk, give us your thoughts on what you were talking about Saturday night in the 250th.
Sure, and it could have been, Todd, that the rain shower outside might have suppressed the cell phone coverage and nobody could get a message out, so they had to put their phones down. But anyway, it was I thought a good event. It turned out pretty well. 300 or 400 people, maybe
easily
over
300 or 400
people.
Easily 300 or 400.
And Don Selvage and Gary Clark and Stephanie Cologne and
James Ring, he was part of it. James was part of it.
And the congressman was there, Scott Franklin. It was a very, very well attended 250 celebration. And again, really, we kind of came together in Polk County just to celebrate our birthday of our country, 1776 to 2026. That's a big deal. And incidentally, as I said to the audience, it was also my 45th anniversary, so I had a big party. I threw a big party for my wife on our 45th.
I thought it was a cheap date where you actually brought her out for someone else to pay for your steak dinner.
Yeah.
So
well,
I hope
I'm on a tight budget anymore.
You fixed income guys.
I know. But listen, it was one of those things where Don asked me if I would talk at the event about 6 or 8 months ago, so I had a long time to think about it, and I did, and I wanted to pose the questions, maybe a couple of questions to everybody in the audience. Where have we been in these last 250 years, and where are we going, and what's it going to take to get 250 more years? Well, that's a long way. So then I really kind of narrowed it down, and I said, Todd, what's it going to take to get to our 300th birthday celebration, which is in 2076, 50 years from now? And I think, once I got doing that, it kind of became a little bit more straightforward. What do I think it's going to take? And I know you and Eli both have opinions on that, but
right.
That's how I posed the question, I think, to the audience, and I think I got them thinking as we went forward. But I did go, where have we been? And you know this, and Eli knows this, and we've studied some of our American history, and where have we been? It was a dangerous time to be new in America, because England and the people didn't want us to break away. They wanted us to be part of the British Empire.
A colony.
Right. Colonies, and our founding fathers said, no way. They said, we're not going to do that. And that American Revolution that really ended up in a Declaration of Independence, a Bill of Rights, and a Constitution took years in the making, but only really came to pass when we won the war that we call our American Revolution. And that was a big deal. And if you haven't studied some of that, it's not bad in this next couple of weeks to look at what it took and how we wrote and how the founding fathers put together those documents. And it formed a new republic, and I went through that very briefly, and it formed a new democracy that I think is pretty durable. And then the Americans, Todd, we started to expand out to the West, and we had some wars on the way, and we fought a lot of people who were here a long time before we were.
Wars and battles.
Yeah, and it really was something we had to ultimately admit that maybe it wasn't as smooth as we thought as we went through. And then we also fought a civil war. And if you haven't studied a little bit about the Civil War of the United States, the North against the South, it was about one topic and one topic only, really, and that was slavery. And wasn't that a scourge on our American history, was slavery, and how many people believed that was the way it should be.
Right.
And the North, under Lincoln and Grant and the other people, ended up winning that war, and we worked our way through it. Industrial Revolution and emergence of the United States as a world power, that's not trivial. We had to figure out how to get ourselves into a position where we could manufacture better than anybody, build ships, build airplanes, build cars, and that got us into the world wars that were supposed to end all wars. We all remember, or should remember, we dropped 2 nuclear weapons on Japan at Hiroshima and Nagasaki that supposedly ended the war, that we would never have another war like that again, but we did. And we knew we did, and it took a while to get through it. So, and I think it's another one, especially here in Florida, that we started this space program that I think is an accomplishment for a nation that everybody should be proud of. And we're still working our way through other places in space, maybe get to Mars one of these days. So we turned out the most powerful country in the world, and that's where we've been. And that's a big deal, isn't it?
It's a huge deal. Hey everybody, if you're looking to purchase a new or pre-owned vehicle from a dealership that makes the process easy, straightforward, and actually enjoyable, you need to check out the Chevrolet Center in Winter Haven, Florida. Located at the corner of Cypress Gardens Boulevard and 1st Street, They've been family owned and operated since 1958, serving our community with top-notch customer satisfaction ever since. My family and I bought several vehicles from the Chevrolet Center, and I am confident they will earn your trust as well. Stop by and say hello to their friendly staff at 101 Cypress Gardens Boulevard in Winter Haven and tell them Todd's podcast sent you. How do you think the founding fathers came up with those ideals and the framework? Do you think they studied all the governments that they knew of in the world? Obviously, there was no computers or whatever, and they had to be able just to, whatever books were available, and say, let's take, this really works well here, this doesn't work so well. Do you think it was kind of a hodgepodge, or do you think it was just a unique thing that someone or a group of men came up with and said, hey, let's try this, this will work?
From my readings on it, Todd, it was a hodgepodge in the beginning, and they forced themselves to tighten up their shot group, their messaging, their understanding of what was most important, not what was somewhat important. And the Federalist Papers that I've read have can walk you through exactly how they kind of got to where it was. What were the inalienable rights? What were the true rights of human beings that wanted to call themselves American citizens? And that's how, after a couple of years, they finally wrote that into documents.
And those guys were probably in their 20s and 30s for the most part.
Yeah.
There weren't a bunch of old scholars. I think
Yeah.
Franklin might have been one of the older ones, but, you know, most of those guys were relatively young.
Yeah, and I mean, and they were real people. I read something in the paper or somewhere yesterday where Ben Franklin had a writing that he did that was about the 50 or 100 ways that you can describe somebody who's had too much to drink. and they're hilarious. So, Ben Franklin was a realist. He didn't say everybody was perfect, and he didn't say he was perfect, and he didn't say we were going to be perfect. And I kind of summarize that part of my talk to say it is an incredible history, but it is definitely not a perfect history, and we didn't really do everything right. And so, therefore, in search of a more perfect union, we're a work in progress, no doubt, and that's what we know as the United States of America. We're a work in progress. So how did I went through a couple of things that we had to fix, and I won't go into them now because most people understand, like I mentioned, how the wars with the American Indians were fought and what we did and didn't do right in those regards. And our Civil War and slavery, we talked about that, but voting rights for women, equal rights for all Americans, black or white, whatever color of skin, those were things we had to fix as Americans in search of a more perfect union. It wasn't all beautiful from the start, and it still isn't right now. There's things we need to work on in order to drive toward a more perfect union. So that's how I kind of rounded out that discussion on where we've been, Todd.
I think when you phrase it like that and you say that is the goal, we've got to try and form a more perfect union. What does that mean? And I mean, that's a concept that I haven't thought about in that context is, hey, we got to try these things. We got to think everything that we do, everything we create has got to be with that end goal is we won't be perfect, but we've got to work and strive to be more perfect and try and make this a better country for all involved.
Yeah, and we won't get into it here because I know you try and ensure, and you and Eli are very good at this, to make this non-political. This is a non-political discussion, but there are things that we need to do as Americans in our elections as to whether we vote by mail or all the different things that we do. We just need to keep refining our processes as Americans, how we run it in this AI-driven world. And it takes time and it takes dialogue, and you got to let everybody talk. You got to give everybody a chance.
There's such a lack of dialogue anymore. It seems like whoever's in charge in whatever state and whatever county, whatever city, wherever, they kind of like being dictators and said, this is how we're going to do it. It's not, hey, guys and gals on the other side of the aisle, this is what we think. Shoot holes in it. Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't, and we'll do the same thing with your ideas. And we have gotten so polarized. Depends on what side you're on. It doesn't really matter. Both sides stink in that regards.
Yeah, and I'll get to that in a minute when I talk about how we're going to get the next 50 somewhat right. But, I'll get to it in a minute. But elected officials have a big part to play in whether we succeed for the next 50 years till 2076. And Todd, I think I made a joke during the meeting, with you and some of our other 1977 class of 1977 classes that we've been around for 25%. I mean, I know Eli laughed at this when I said, geez, I've been around for 25% of our nation's history.
He's been around for about 12%.
Yeah, Eli's about 12, maybe 13%.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm an old person in a AI-driven world, and I realize that. And I made a couple jokes about riding my 10-speed bike around Winter Haven and running stop signs, and never really having to stop. I didn't even have my hand on the wheel most of the time because it wasn't that big of a city. And then when I did get a car, Eli, if I could put 5 gallons of gas in the car at 50 cents a gallon,
right.
I was a happy camper. It could get me 2 weeks worth of driving. So
we could ski all day on a Saturday with gas when it was 35-40 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
Whoever had $2.53, we could go get a tank of gas and ski all day long.
And then I had a calculus teacher who I think really he kind of got me on the straight and narrow, because my first calculus score, he turned it back to me with his rotten grade that I got. I don't even remember if it was a passing grade, and he asked me if I had an artificial brain. And I thought, geez, it's artificial intelligence now, but back then he asked me if I had a plastic brain.
That same teacher asked me if I even had a brain. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
So it was, where we've been and what part you and I have played is not so important now as the part that Eli and the younger generations are going to play. And that's where I kind of said to myself, is there a person in the crowd of 300 or 400 people that might be the one 50 years from now giving a speech on how we're going to get to our 350th birthday.
I love that point when you made it like that.
It's
who of yours will step up?
It's real. And I got the 16, 17, 18-year-old kids that I had met earlier during the, I can't say cocktail hour because they weren't having cocktails, but I went over and met them, and they said, I said, stand up when I asked you to, please, because I'm going to emphasize that one of you's got to give the speech in 50 years. On what it'll take to get 50 more years after your 300th birthday.
And I like the fact that they were seated down front.
Yeah.
They weren't a throwaway, hey, we got an extra table, let's put some seat fillers in there. They were an integral part of the event that evening.
Yeah. And again, it's what I think is most important as we think about the future is them. And I know Eli is a young man with a great future. And Eli, you've got to think your way through how you vote, how you emphasize, how you influence, because there's some hard decisions ahead of America. And we need to get it right, so we don't need to try and decide too quickly. We have to talk about it. And that's why I say it's going to come out of the younger generation. And we need to teach, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the last 250 years. And that's what my first review was.
Does that start in civics?
Yeah. Heck yeah.
And how young should people be when they start civics? I think Eli was talking with some kids that he's been counseling recently, and were they elementary?
Yeah, I think 4th grade. And he's taking civics this past year for the first time.
Right, and I know you and I had it in 8th or 9th grade, with Mr. Garrett and some of the other guys, and
they made you think. They made you, because we weren't that keen on learning about the founding fathers when you're a young guy. Yeah, it wasn't what you wanted to do, but they made me do it. They made you do it, and I think we got to do that. How did those kids react when you were talking to them about it? Were they nonplussed with it, Eli, or is it like, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're saying, because you might be the president of the United States in a few years.
They weren't necessarily excited, we're learning civics, but they were very interested in learning how we came to be, and were asking me questions about not just U.S. history, but also world history.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. You are right on the money, because as every nation kind of evolves, the United States kind of evolves alongside them, and we have to be cognizant of that. So it's got to be world history too, and you got to teach them. You can't just assume that they read it, from social media or whatever else. We got to actually teach them with some kind of curriculum that makes sense to all of us. So what I then went into, Todd, was okay, let me give you a quick laundry list. Let me just walk you through a couple things I think are important for us as Americans and us here in Polk County, Central Florida, to concentrate on. And the first one, go figure, is we need to emphasize our kids, our young people. We need to educate our young people here in Florida better than we are today. And we really need to make sure that we emphasize to parents that how we raise them is important, the values we teach them is important, and the education that the system, let's call it the Polk County school system, offers them. And to do that, it's got to be in the best schools. It's got to be with classrooms that have really state-of-the-art stuff in them that you and I know about, but we're not used to learning like they do. We've got to adjust for artificial intelligence, and we got to make sure. My biggest point, I think I made the other night, Todd, was we have to pay our teachers, a fair salary, a fair wage, so that they are motivated to teach our kids, and it's got to be competitive in the state of Florida. And I know that can be a little contentious, Todd.
But how do you determine what's fair? I'm not saying, a lot of people say we got to do what's fair. Well, define fair, and that gives us a number to shoot at, because money does have to come from somewhere. And in the past, public servants, people that work for government, hey, part of your reward is you get a check every Tuesday or every Friday, and you get retirement, and if you're a teacher, you get the summers off, and that seems to have flipped. It's now more about the salary, and the benefits seem to be secondary, not just for teachers, but for a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a dialogue, and it's got to be done by the professionals, people who've been in the business for a long time, people who have been principals and understand it. And I don't have a number for you, but I do say we should compare. I mean, what a Hillsborough County teacher is paid influences our young people who are teachers in Polk County, and same Highlands and all the surrounding areas. So I do think we need to have an adult conversation about making sure our teachers are well compensated to teach our kids, because they're first and foremost what we got to do to succeed.
And I don't disagree. Some of that compensation was, hey, cost of living in Polk County is less than it is in Hillsborough or some of the others. So those factors have to weigh in. And, is that a part of why, if we are lagging behind some of the others? I know we've dealt with it with firefighters, with police officers, sheriff's deputies, all of that. If everyone gets paid what they're worth, then there's not enough money to go around.
Yeah, and this better than I do with 8 years on the Polk County Commission and all the tough votes and all the budgets that you had to pass. I get it, and that's why I say, for the 13, 14 minutes I was on the stage, I had the microphone, I get to say things, but obviously it's something I feel that's important, and our students, really we need to pay it forward.
How do we create that opportunity for the dialogue? One thing I thought of when I was a county commissioner, we should have like a Ben Franklin Society and have smart people in a room. And maybe it's 10 or 15 and there's a whole bunch of them around. And today the one in Fort Meade is going to talk about teacher salary, and the one in Lakeland is going to talk about firefighter salary, and how do we get to that number? But it doesn't seem like there's ever an opportunity for thoughtful, intelligent people to sit around and talk without outside noise creeping in.
Yeah, it may seem like it's less and less. It happens less and less. Right. But I truly do think we do a pretty good job of it here in Polk County. And Rotaries do it, service clubs do it, churches do it, men's club, women's club. They have these dialogues. And then you get great op-eds if you actually do read the paper. There's a lot of people that are willing to take a minute and go through it. So that was my number one on my laundry list. The second one was the importance of service, and I called it, really, to make it clear, community service. And I ensured that people didn't think I was advocating for a draft or anything like that. It's not military service. Right. It's service to your community, service to, and a willingness to serve in your country and your community. And remember what I did, Eli. I just very simply asked, for anybody in the audience in the past year had volunteered their time or talents or treasure in their community to raise their right hand. And how many was it? Well, Eli, it was a bunch, wasn't it?
It was quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, and
Everyone at our table.
yeah, and I said that's part of the greatness of America. That doesn't happen in all other countries. Right. I can assure you of that, and I'll get to that in a minute. It doesn't happen in all other countries. So the fact that so many Americans are willing to help each other, help their neighbor, that's the greatness of America. We just got to keep that going because it'll make a difference. And then I said, let's set a goal tonight to go out and do a little bit more tomorrow and then ask whoever you help to go help somebody else. And then we'll get to 780,000 or whatever it is. Polk Countyans will have helped their neighbor, and look at the impact.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by Saunders Real Estate, your trusted partner in land and commercial real estate since 1996. With over 125 expert advisors located throughout the Southeast United States, the full-service brokerage specializes in a wide range of property types from farms and ranches to commercial buildings and development land. If you're looking to build your legacy with a confident investment, please visit SaundersRealEstate.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. A good friend of mine that was president of the Florida Realtors a few years after me, then he went on to be the president of the National Association of Realtors. His inaugural speech was, and then some. Mm-hmm. And I listened, and he was saying, okay, you help this person, and then some. Yeah. And then some. Just do a little bit more, and then that starts to steamroll and snowball.
Yeah, and again, this happens in churches and coaches, and that's why I say it really is a strong point of America from every community I've lived in America, but I could compare and contrast by the other nations I've lived in, which were many. The next thing I went through was to ensure that we have a strong military. And everybody went, since I was in my uniform, right, Eli, everybody kind of goes, okay, here it comes. He wants more jet fighters and he wants more, ships and missiles and all that. But that's not what I said. What I said was, we need to, if we're going to get 50 more years out of this big country, we need to make sure that our military stays apolitical. We do not want our military to be asked, what party are you in? Who did you vote for? Are you a Republican or a Democrat? We did not want that. We do not want that. We got to ensure tomorrow that doesn't happen. And we got to let, first responders, the sheriff, the police, we've got to let them do the domestic business so it doesn't look like our military is in the domestic business. And that's a big one. I mean, we do not want to let that slip in the next few years. It's a tough one because you can say there's
that's where it gets really political.
I know, and you can say where the National Guard. Every state has a National Guard. Right. And they have soldiers that are working on things that the governor asks them to work on, hurricane recovery, etc. That's fine, but local police, riot control, those kind of things, you want your military to stay out of that. And I really advocate.
How do they stay out of it, though, when the political leaders tell them to?
It's very delicate.
Yeah, hey, you can't go.
It's very delicate.
Help the police. You as military, you can't do that. I mean, you did it for 34 years.
Yeah.
And you figured out a way to thread the needle, and your buddies did too.
Yeah, and you can't put a political party label on me. You still can't today, Todd, and I've told you about that over a beer. I just refuse to let somebody label me as a Republican or a Democrat. If anything, you want to call me as an independent, but I have certain inclinations on how I vote and, fiscal responsibility, those things. But I don't need a label from a political party since I'm still seen in uniform once in a while. So, again, that's a big deal. And that's kind of the military needs to support and defend the Constitution of the United States that we talked about earlier. And not a political party, not not an elected official or anything else. The Constitution of the United States, and so therefore you can look back and you go, yeah, young people need to learn and defend, and volunteers need to serve and defend. And so as you think about how we as Americans go through life, think about what your role is as you defend our democracy and our Constitution.
So you said young people need to learn and defend, and volunteers need to
Well,
serve
when they're
and
young,
defend. That's what you meant? Okay.
Yeah, I mean
it's a little nuance. I mean, it's important.
It is. Their job as high schoolers are to learn how to read, write, do math, do calculus.
And be good citizens.
And be good citizens and be understanding of where your American history goes, and then be ready to defend your country and the Constitution and democracy that it stands for. And then people who serve their country, they serve and defend their country and their Constitution. And the final list or item on my list, Todd, was elected officials. And I looked out in the audience, and I have a lot of friends who are elected officials, one of which is you. I will always look at you as somebody who really stepped up and helped run the county, a huge county. And I looked at Scott Franklin, and I looked at all of the elected officials out there. And I'm reminded of this phrase that I've learned over the decades, that if you want to complain about your elected officials, well, then do something about it.
Right.
Run for office, because those who run govern. Those who don't run for office
complain,
but they can't govern because they haven't taken the time to run for office and hopefully win if they have the right values and the right platform. But I ask for a round of applause for all our elected officials who decided to run for office and actually won. It's a big deal, isn't it?
It is. I think that Eli threw a tomato at me when you said a round of applause for all the elected officials. Luckily, I saw it coming. But, you can't vote for someone that's not on the ballot.
Yeah.
I mean, unless people will actually stand up. And I was watching a show this morning as I was getting dressed, and this lady was complaining about the school board, this and that. And I said, then you should run.
Yeah.
If you don't like the policies that the school board or the city or county commission or your state legislators run, it's not the hardest thing in the world. It's not easy. There's a whole lot that goes into it. But if you don't run, someone else is going to run it.
Yeah.
And you're not going to like it. And if you get qualified people whose names have been at the bottom right of a paycheck instead of the back of a paycheck, and understand, hey, this is how much it costs to do some things, that's important. And if you get people, especially on the school board, sorry, this is your show, not mine. I'm kind of pontificating now.
Keep going. You're making my point.
If people don't get out and say, I want this for the school, I want this for the kids, if that person doesn't run, they could be saying that in a closet. No one would hear them.
Yeah, they're having the dialogue that we did when our Constitution was formed, and developed. There's a dialogue by people who aren't elected officials that's necessary. But, when you've got to actually vote on the county commission, it's your job to vote. Right. It's your time to vote. It's your job to govern. And that's where I say. And my daughter-in-law, Julie, lives in Washington, D.C. with my son, who's in the Air Force. And their two kids, and Julie's passion in life, and works hard in the effort to encourage young women to run for office, to encourage women to run for elected office.
She going to run?
She may, once my son quits dragging her to Africa and dragging her.
When she can sleep in the same bed.
When she can stay for more than a couple of years in one place, she might run for office because she's a wonderful speaker and a terrific thinker. But her job right now is to encourage young women to run for office, and I think that's important. The last thing I said on this topic was to our elected officials, and I looked at a few of them. I made sure that they were really knew that I was putting just a bit of pressure on them, but that was that they should really do the right thing for the public's interest, for the citizens in their county or in their district or in their state. Best interest, and not necessarily wonder what the party's platform is. I know that's a tough one, and I really we don't need to get into it because it's a concept for elected officials to think about, but the public's best interest is what they should really concentrate on.
We can have that discussion around your dining room table next time.
Yeah.
Next time Sandra decides to invite me over for dinner.
Yeah.
But you're right. But just know that when you think of a constituent's best interest, there's half the other people that's not necessarily in their best interest. So it's a tough thing you got to thread. It's a tough needle you got to thread. So
yeah, and we're watching across the country a lot of senators, representatives, governors, people that are trying to make sure that they are remembered as pushing social policy, fiscal policy, et cetera, immigration policy, et cetera, in a way that they think is appropriate for the public's best interest. And sometimes that goes against their party's desires, and that gets a little contentious, but right. So be it. That's my challenge to them, so that we can get 50 more years, is elected officials really need to keep track of what the public's best interest is. Now, obviously, that is a broad phrase, but that's okay. It's a good way to kind of, run your ideas by yourself. Is this in the public's best interest?
I think after the show, we're going to start a presidential pack for Eli running for president of the United States in 2 or 3 decades. So, Eli, tighten up over there.
I finished my talk by just saying that Sandra and I have been, again, this was our anniversary, so I had to tell her I remembered how many years, 45 years. But I also told everybody that I've lived in a lot of countries, and let's say a handful, 5, 6, 7 countries. I've lived for more than 6 or 8 months in a country, and some for 2 or 3 years. And I can tell you from experience, we have a great country. Our government, our constitution, our democracy, the way we have checks and balances, the way our 3 branches of government are supposed to keep an eye on each other, but they are supposed to stay in their lane as well. We have a great country, a great democracy. And it requires us to protect it, and it requires us to defend it. And we've got to learn about it. We've got to serve in support of it. And, our elected officials need to really keep track of the big picture as they go about their daily job. So that was what I really wanted to say. And I think in 13 or 14 minutes, I went pretty quickly.
Yep. Hey, everybody. This is your host, Todd Dantzler. As most of you know, I'm a partner with Saunders Real Estate and have been a very active and working broker for over 42 years. I have fostered strong relationships throughout the state of Florida, working on properties ranging from agriculture and development land to multifamily, commercial, and industrial projects. If you have any real estate needs at all, please give me a call. I'd love to help. My direct line is 863-877-2846. Thank you. Earlier in our conversation today, but you had talked about how after we've gone through the wars last century, or in the 1800s and early 1900s, how the United States geared up and started building this industrial base and doing these things. How did we do that? Obviously, capitalism had to be a huge part of it. You had to have a government that was kind of unified and going together. Could a country like this be created today, do you think?
Well, it's a really a whole separate discussion where the people who you attract at your podcast, some of them are really good at understanding, how to define free market.
Right.
Entrepreneurial tendencies and or innovative companies, how startups can really get over the hump and out of the valley of death. But suffice it to say, the United States is still the most innovative country in the world.
Right.
I mean, Europe right now we've lapped most of them in terms of innovation and the different things that are going on in the AI revolution. Now they know that, and they're trying to work their way into competitiveness. And China, in some ways, is a peer competitor. So China, in some ways, is very industrialized and very innovative and very advanced manufacturing. However, never forget that their government is completely different.
Yeah, so I was going to say, they have a dictator, and they cut through the red tape because there is no red tape.
Yeah, and
you don't like it? Okay, we'll take these people out.
And he really has made, and the Communist Party in China has made some decisions on real estate, your world, your business, that have backfired. That backfired, and the real estate implosion in China is huge right now, and they're having to fix it. But yeah. All the other things that human rights and everything that they have to try and, either whitewash or fix, but they've got some significant challenges.
So your dad was he a colonel in the Air Force?
No, he was a major.
Major in the Air Force.
He was enlisted in the Navy when he started his.
Okay, but he was pilot.
Yep.
And you and your brother are both generals, pilots.
Yep.
With that goes the family all over. You traveled around with your dad, and your mom, went around. Your family traveled with you. Rob's family travels with him. What does this country mean to you and your family?
Well, I think it means a lot to me and to Sandra and to my sons and their wives. They really, I think, have an appreciation for our country. We take very little of our freedom. We take very little for granted in relation to our freedoms. And as I told Commissioner Nat Birdsong this morning when I got to fly him around Winter Haven, I said my parents didn't have a lot of extra cash when I was growing up. And while I've enjoyed my youth, I didn't have a lot of amenities in life. And this country allowed me to go out and work hard and save money, and my wife to work hard and save money. And now we are, able to buy things. That's because the country encourages hard work. It encourages people to go out and really provide for their families and everything. And it's not something you don't do handouts. You do hard work and you get yourself ready. And I believe that's the character and grit of America is hard work, dedication, good education, and and good family values. So I think that's all about America.
So as we approach Independence Day, can you talk about the sacrifices that our military makes for our country and for our community? Because it was articulated some Saturday night, and it was highlighted. All the branches were there. Everybody was appreciated and thanked. But the sacrifices that the men and women over the history of time, in our country especially, and that are doing it today, is phenomenal. And if you've never been in the military, I haven't, I can only think about what you guys had to go through.
Yeah, I think you noticed that table up front at the America 250 the other day out at Sun and Fun, and it was a table full of Gold Star families, some of which I knew and some of which I had talked to, and they were families who had lost loved ones in some of the wars and different things that the military has to fight. And so that's the biggest sacrifice is when your son or daughter, mother or father go off to war but don't come back. That's a big deal, and that's where the ultimate sacrifice is met by our military, and that's why we hold them in high regard. But the other men and women who just deployed to the Middle East at the moment's notice that they had to back in February when Epic Fury kicked off. And some of them are still over there and had no intention of being deployed to the Middle East from February of 2026 to June of 2020. None of them, many of them probably didn't expect to be over there for this time. And they had graduations and they had anniversaries and everything. So those are the obvious sacrifices, Todd. And while we should recognize it, it's what they signed up to do because they weren't drafted like they were in Vietnam with some of the stories that Gary Clark gave and the other guys, James Ring talked about.
Right.
Those guys were drafted and they had no choice and they were sent. Today, people volunteer to serve in the military.
Polk County is a Purple Heart County, and we're very proud of the fact that we are. A lot of work went into getting that designation. How do we motivate other counties, other cities to kind of adopt that mentality as we've got to start honoring our military Is it a one-off, one-on-one thing? Is it, hey, there needs to be a concentrated effort? Is it there needs to be an increase in general respect for the men and women in uniform?
It's what we do in Polk County. What we did the other night, Saturday night, is what we do.
Phenomenal.
It took 6 or 8 months in the planning. It took a lot of hard work. You saw a lot of really familiar companies and entities step up to host and pay for some of the young people's tickets. It's what we do in Polk County that actually ends up being, making us a Purple Heart County. And so the only thing we really need to do is keep doing what we've been doing. And that's why I say, for all of us, if you want 50 more years out of this great country, keep doing what you've been doing. If you volunteer at your church or you coach your daughter's softball team, keep doing what you do. And that is the greatness of America. It's not that we can, build fighter jets better than anybody else. It's that we really are a service-oriented people, and especially here in Polk County, that's the case.
You've mentioned several times the next 50 years get to 300. Do you think the Founding Fathers said, how do we create a country that gets us to 50? I mean, I'm sure they probably never envisioned, hey, how do we get to 250?
Yeah.
You're on a 50-year increment. Do you think they were saying, how do we get to next Tuesday, maybe?
Well, I think when you wrote those documents, we, the people of the United States of America, in order to form those words took depth and breadth of understanding, and they knew that they were forming a democracy that was different than anything in the world back then and may be less durable, 50 years from now. So how did they do it? If you read in the Federalist Papers, they knew they were trying to form something that would last. And that Constitution, man, I tell you, a lot of countries around the world, when they've had a big revolution, they grab our Constitution, they huddle up with themselves for a year and figure out what they want to copy out of our Constitution.
Who do you think, that you've been all over the world, who do you think copies us the best? Who do you think's Constitution is closest to ours?
It's a tough question.
It's an unfair question because I didn't ask you that before. So
tough one because, some of I remember being in a country in North Africa or West Africa called Liberia, right? Liberia, you know where that is?
West Africa.
Yeah, and you know what
See, I'm not that dumb, man.
The
Context
capital
clues.
of Liberia is Monrovia.
Right.
They cut and paste our Constitution into their own, and they have tried to mimic our Constitution in West Africa. And I was there. I visited them, and I met our ambassador. I met our defense attaché, and they were very, very prone to say we are trying to do this the way we did it in America. Were they successful? Not greatly, not vastly.
But weren't they proud of the effort
but
they were
trying,
for?
and it was a poverty-stricken country in West Africa.
I mean, you look at the resources we have in this wonderful country, and then you look at a West African country that may not have natural resources to pull from.
Yeah, you look at South Korea after that war ended, and you look at how South Korea formed its government, and they did a very interesting mix of different things that they had before and that they had, but they tried to get some of their government agencies to look like ours and their policies and everything. So again, I could go on, and I lived in South Korea for almost 5 years total. They came a long way to one of the 10th largest economies in the world, but they still have things they have to fix.
Right.
And it's a work in progress.
Well, I asked you last night if you would come on, and you were very gracious once you got out of the plane today. I want to respect your time. I do want to give Eli the opportunity to say the word that none of us can say. What does 250 mean?
Semiquincentennial.
That's exactly right, and I taught him to say that.
I know, and you said that before we started, and I said, Eli will not repeat after you because I just bungled it up.
If you think I taught him that, you're crazy, because I can't say it either. But, I do appreciate your service, appreciate your family service, and appreciate your words that you had last Saturday night, and all the men and women who have served. It was just a wonderful evening. It was very patriotic. And if you didn't come away from there feeling like, wow, that's pretty impressive, you weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
And is there anything you want to close with?
No, just happy birthday, America. Again, it's a big deal, and we ought to all, feel good about it, and we ought to wish each other a happy birthday, and then we ought to dedicate ourselves to protect the Constitution and defend it, and we ought to commit to 300 celebration in Sun and Fun's hangar
will be president,
in 2076,
or maybe governor,
and we'll ask Eli to give the keynote speech, and I'll be with you in spirit there, Eli.
I'll start writing right now.
But thank you, and congratulations to Mrs. Polumbo for putting up with you for 45 years.
Amen.
A feat that few others match.
Few others could manage.
Yeah, I do want to close talking about the 22 project. I know it's important to you. It's important to me. The founders are Alex and Erica Cruz. They're out of Delray Beach. Their mission is to provide vital support and resources to veterans who suffer from TBI, which is traumatic brain injury, and also from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, through the use of the hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is HBOT. And we've had your brother on, who's heavily involved with them, and Alex. We've talked about it before. We've had fundraisers in Winter Haven. People do things all across the world, all across the country for them. They've got golf tournaments coming up.
It really does work. It really, it's a remarkable treatment that has nothing to do with prescription drugs and everything else. It really just kind of helps the brain heal from
it kind of resets the brain.
Yeah,
almost.
It does, and it really works, and there's so many success stories.
So go to their website, support 22, the number 22, support22project.org, and write them a check. I know, Jake, you have, your brother has, a lot of our friends have. It doesn't matter. Just write them a check. It's important. They're taking care of the men and women who have come back broken, and it gives them and their families an opportunity to be a little bit closer to whole and to function better in life. So.
And most of the money you donate will go straight to another treatment for another veteran, and
that's right.
There's very little overhead.
Yeah. So thank you, Jake, for coming on. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Todd's podcast, and we will talk to you next time.
Happy semi-quincentennial, everyone.
What he said.
Go Eli.
Thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me, suggestions for future guests, or are interested in sponsorship opportunities for our podcast, please just fill out the contact form on my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.